Good morning, everyone. In my time as a wildlife photographer, I've had the privilege to visit some pretty amazing places and photograph some incredible wildlife. Everything from giant bears in the wilds of Alaska, the plentiful wildlife in the magnificent Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, to the incredible Masai Mara in Kenya with all of its outstanding wildlife. It's safe to say that I've put thousands of miles on my truck and been on dozens of flights. But even with all of this exploring and travel, there's one set of habitats that has consistently provided me with countless photography opportunities and wildlife encounters, and it's much closer to you than you might think: our own cities and towns. Come along with me today as I take you through the best places to look for wildlife in a bustling city and let you know how to best capitalize on the many photography opportunities in this wonderful habitat. Let's get into it. The city that I live in and will be using as an example in much of today's video is likely different than yours, but I've found that as I've traveled throughout the country that many of the opportunities that present themselves can be found nearly anywhere, and many of the habitat features that I'll cover today can be found in almost any city or town. I'd also love to hear from you. Where do you prefer to find and photograph wildlife in a city or town setting, and why? Let us know in the comments below. There are some species that adapt better to urban scenarios than others, my favorite of those being red foxes. Red foxes are the most widespread carnivore worldwide, much because they're able to adapt so well to cities and towns. My favorite places to look for red foxes in an urban area are on golf courses and in fields around town. By searching empty fields around town early in the morning and later in the evening, you'll increase your chances of finding these charismatic canids. The majority of my red fox encounters and red fox dens that I've photographed have been right in the middle of town in an empty field or on the outskirts of a town in a farmer's pasture. Another good thing about finding a fox den in or around town is that they're generally much more tolerant to your presence than they'd be if you were to find them in a more wild setting. If you respect their space and photograph them in an ethical manner, you'll have countless photography opportunities over the span of days, weeks, and even years. My absolute favorite area and habitat to look for wildlife in and around town are walking trails next to a river or stream. These habitats in town may not be as common as the others that we're talking about today, but if you have a river trail in your city or town, I'd recommend spending as much time as possible in these areas. The diversity of species that can be found along these riparian areas is simply outstanding. I've photographed countless species of songbirds and ducks along these river trails. I've seen more deer in these habitats than in others around town. Smaller mammals like raccoons and skunks will commonly feed on the berries that grow along the river's edge, as well as the insects, small mammals, and amphibians that reside here as well. I've photographed many river otters, muskrats, beavers, and minks that swim, hunt, and feed in and around the water. If there are trees along the trail, keep a sharp eye out for species like woodpeckers and owls, as they'll commonly roost and nest around a water source. There's a reason why these areas are my favorite habitats to look for wildlife in around town. They are truly amazing. Join me on an amazing safari in Kenya's Masai Mara. Incredible wildlife encounters, a comfortable safari camp with all the accommodations, enough room in the vehicles for yourself, your gear, and uninterrupted views from both sides, and the best guides out there. Our full days in the field lead to encounter after encounter, starting before the sun has risen and ending after it's set. Spots are available for later this year and early next year, so hit the link in the description below to get more details and to sign up now. Let's get back into it. I don't know if I've ever visited a city or town that doesn't have a city park. In fact, when visiting a new area, this is generally the first place that I start my search for local wildlife. I like to visit early in the morning and have found that there are very few places out there that are better for squirrel photography. Squirrels can be very difficult to photograph in the wild, but head to your local city park and you'll have opportunity after opportunity to photograph these energetic little mammals. Most of my favorite squirrel photos have come from city parks, and you can turn a slow morning into a very productive photo shoot. I've also photographed raccoons and the occasional fox in city parks. These are absolutely wonderful areas for wildlife photography. If your city or town has a local pond or lake, it's well worth spending some time around it to see what wildlife you can find. Animals are naturally drawn to water sources out of necessity, and these locations can be true wildlife hotspots. You'll likely see a number of ducks, geese, songbirds, and small mammals like squirrels, raccoons, and even foxes. Deer will also occasionally visit during the more quiet hours of the day. If the pond or lake has a thicket of trees nearby, it's always worth checking it for woodpeckers, owls, and other common urban raptor species like Cooper's hawks and kestrels. I found that duck photography in these areas is some of the easiest wildlife photography that you can do. Since the ducks are generally very tolerant, you can usually get right down to the water's edge to get on eye level, and your movements aren't restricted like they would be if you were using a floating blind. As you leave your home to go looking for wildlife, chances are there are a lot more animals in your own neighborhood than you're aware of. I found that in neighborhoods, especially those with more developed trees, you can find all manner of species like owls, woodpeckers, songbirds, squirrels, raccoons, and so much more. One of my favorite things to do in my own neighborhood is to take a walk after the sun is set and things have quieted down a bit and listen for owls, specifically screech owls. This is a species of owl that thrives in urban areas. In fact, the majority of my screech owl encounters and photos have come from various neighborhoods. As you walk, listen for their calls and identify what trees and areas in your neighborhood they like to hang out in. Return during the day and look for tree holes, whitewash, and pellets. Talk to your neighbors about what you're doing, and many of them will give you permission to look through their trees and may even aid you in your search. Like I mentioned, most of my screech owl encounters happen in neighborhoods, and with the help of friends and neighbors, I've photographed many owls and even owl nests just walking distance from my own home. I've used this method of locating owls in various neighborhoods and have been able to find barred owls, great horned owls, saw-whet owls, burrowing owls, and even barn owls. If you just love owls, another really good place to find them in a city setting is your local cemetery. I've been able to find owls in nearly every cemetery I've visited and specifically looked for owls in. Just please be respectful to those around you. As I look for wildlife in a neighborhood setting, I like to do so early in the morning and later in the evening. In fact, just last night I was able to spend the evening with some mule deer that hang out in an open field right in my own neighborhood. And during this video, you've probably heard the sparrows calling repeatedly as I walk you through which areas are best to look for wildlife in. These sparrows nest right in my own neighborhood, and I'm able to photograph them really whenever I want. Many of the species that can be found in these urban habitats are much easier to photograph than they would be in a wild setting because they're generally more used to people. You can make some really great and creative images in a relatively short amount of time. That being said, these animals still need their space to feel comfortable, and we should be approaching each scenario in the most ethical way possible. Check this video out right here to see some real-life examples of how best to photograph species like owls and foxes in the most ethical manner while still getting the best results. Thank you so much for following along. I always appreciate the support. We'll see you next time.